Hello, and thank you for watching Two Perspectives for Understanding Security. From a traditional construct, most security professionals would like to look at their security environment as an ecosystem. And that ecosystem would consist of some sort of a central aggregation platform to look at all the different telemetry that is collected by the various elements and data points that exist in a security posture for authentication and data protection applications, network, endpoint, mobile, and of course fraud or other types of capabilities that may be specific to an individual business. Now, the fundamental problem with this model, as complete as it may be from a security perspective, is that when a security professional tries to communicate the value of that model to a business professional or somebody from a line of business, when they talk about this ecosystem, it really just appears to be very confusing, or the true value of that ecosystem is not fully understood. So ultimately, from a value proposition perspective or a business justification perspective as to why people need to pay more attention to security or why people need to move forward with a security project, you're trying to force fit. So if we revisit this idea of an ecosystem, which makes a lot of sense, let's visualize it a little bit differently and how a business unit owner might look at it. A business unit owner would look at this from a very different perspective. Instead of seeing some aggregation platform in the middle, they would see their intellectual property there. And surrounding that intellectual property are all of the different things that feed into it or pull from it to make the business work. And that makes sense. So how do we bridge the gap? How do we make sense to a business individual of what security actually is and why security is so important? Let's look at a very different way of visualizing security. If we start with the basic premise that people, whether they're employees or customers, use devices to access networks which then connect to information sources and databases, that's the general flow of how the world works. But there's two perspectives to this model. There's the first perspective, which is the one that all of us interact with every day in everything we do. And that is, we have some sort of credentials that are based on who we are and what we want to connect to and what we're trying to do. We then access through mobile devices or content applications or perform commerce transactions or check emails. All of these things then traverse the network, which then access information. So all of these different areas need their own protections. I need something to verify that I am who I say I am. I need something to make sure that somebody hasn't logged into an account and is committing fraud on my behalf, or I don't have an application that's performing badly, or I have a mobile device or an application on an endpoint that isn't working correctly. I need to make sure that as I perform transactions across the cloud and the network that they're done securely, and that on the database side, there's proper audit trails and security in place to monitor them to make sure that nothing's being abused. And all of this is classified as day in the life. This is all about information risk and protection. And the reason why it's day in the life is because this is the stuff that everybody does all the time on an individual by individual basis. So that's one side of the coin. The other perspective is what happens above that. So in my core security environment, I still need something to look at all of my physical assets and my endpoints and make sure that they're properly patched. And if there are vulnerabilities out in my environment, I know what they are and how critical they may be in general and to my environment. I need to be able to look at the network and make sure that nobody's stealing information or that information isn't leaving the environment or moving between systems that it's not supposed to be. I need to be able to look at end-to-end analytics to make sure that I don't see chains of activity that could be an indicator of threat or an indicator of compromise. I need to be able to make sure I can run reports so that if I have specific regulatory requirements or I want to adhere to a certain framework, I can do so. I need to be able to know that I can gather all of my information and facts together and perform forensic investigation so that if I do have a potential compromise or a real threat in my environment, I can gather all of the associated information and properly document it. And then once I have all of that, I have to be able to remediate it. So I need a workbook. I need a set of workflows and instructions that show me exactly what I need to do to follow a process to effectively isolate and potentially clean the environment, and then hopefully use that knowledge to retune my system so that what happened to me yesterday doesn't happen to me again tomorrow. And all of that is really out of line of day in the life, but it is very relevant to everyday life of the security operations and response teams in an enterprise. Now, while the top part, the everyday life part, really is going to be quite consistent industry to industry and customer to customer, the day in the life is going to be very different, but both are absolutely essential to a complete security posture. So let's tie this all back together again. If we start with the business-focused ecosystem and we layer on top of that the concepts of both everyday life for security operations and response and day in the life for information risk and protection, what we can get are very specific use cases. And those use cases allow the security teams and the business teams to come together and get all the pieces in place to not only develop and implement a complete security posture, but everybody from the business understanding why it's so critical, how it's being done, and what they're going to get out of it. Thank you.